didn't watch. The American ruling class has become extremely detached from reality, living their lives of fabulously rich decadence in the District of Columbia, Northern Virginia, New York City, and Los Angeles, with no reason to care about anyone else. Because the only way people can rise is through pleasing the powers that be instead of merit, especially if the media, people become fatalistic and lose hope. This is combined with loneliness, the culture wars, and economic pessimism, which helps fuel political radicalism, with some people giving up on their own free and prosperous Western civilization and working with totalitarian regimes of China and Russia. Responding to WhatIfAltHist's on Decadence, and responding to Ubersoy on why the right supports Russia, Western self-loathing, and Tankies, and the fifth column in the anti-war / anti-imperialist movements. Why would anyone support China or Russia? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Remember, the lesser of two evils is still evil, and the enemy of my enemy is not my friend. Pen.
Who are they? They are the dark armies. The dark, murdering armies of Eurasia. In the barren deserts of Africa and India, on the oceans of Australasia, courage, strength, and youth are sacrificed. Sacrificed to barbarians whose only honor is atrocity.
If you want a vision of the future, Winston, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
I'm worried that's going to become real. To understand what I'm going to write about, I highly recommend reading the novel 1984 by George Orwell. A summary of how society works is described in Oceania 1984 by the Templin Institute. Now, I also talk about decadence. What is decadence? Is it a triple chocolate cake? Is it giant Roman orgies with peacocks on the serving table with people vomiting up their food so they can wolf down another round? The definition of decadence that I'll be using for this article is a combination of complete and utter irrationality, the inability to deal with the real world, and the complete lack of ethics and morals from the powers that be who want to detach the populace from reality, and why this is a danger to not only Western civilization, but to all of human freedom and prosperity. I'm concerned about the West's lack of confidence in itself, with people turning to extreme ideologies in hopes of changing anything, or out of simple nihilism, and even the danger of a potential fifth column backed by the West's enemies, namely China, and especially, and I mean especially, Russia. Before you read, if you haven't done so already, see A Study of Decadence, When Societies Commit Suicide. Paradoxically, I criticize Western wars not because I hate the West, but because I love it. I do not want the West to send its sons and daughters into death in wars. Neither do I want the West to discredit itself and alienate foreign nations from incompetent and or corrupt foreign policy. The reasons to support the West over the likes of Russia or especially China is the simple fact that you're reading or listening to this, and I'm not dead or incarcerated. In Western countries, you have the freedom of the press to criticize the government's foreign policy. The same cannot be said in Russia or especially China. This article is largely a combination from writings from two other articles. being should Muslims and anti-imperialists support China or Russia? And the problem with Noam Chomsky, both of which goes over problems with the anti-war movement. The former article talking about Tankies, and the latter article talking about social justice and political correctness. Part 1. Decadence in Western Civilization.
In all these cases, we see a shared subset of decadence, which is the sheer disconnect from fundamental reality that's manifested here through the utter inability to deal with the real world of literal barbarians coming and destroying everything these people loved. Decadence comes in many forms, whether an overt or insane luxury, belief in bizarre and backwards fads, and the list can go on, but on all the fundamental bases, it's an inability to come to terms with the reality that's staring straight at you, and instead preferring to hide behind some culturally constructed vision of the world. There's an underlying fundamental logic to how decadence and all its bizarre irrationality works. It is the willingness to put culturally constructed reality above reality itself. In this process, the cultural constructions become bitter at realizing their own weakness and thus try to tear themselves apart, while ignoring the outside world that they fundamentally understand they are at odds with. When people's actions are judged based on popularity inside their local social communities rather than actually spreading a society in the real world, stuff like agreeability, compliance, or being indoctrinated with the values of the society become important. High society becomes a giant court where people try to fake agreeability and kindness to gain allies rather than a warband where people speak and act plainly. This is definitely something I've seen in successful circles in America, where people act in overly polite and pretend to be sensitive so as not to offend. Society takes on a more feminine character as this sort of world generally plays in women's hands more effectively. What's happened in each of these decadent societies is that ideological structures develop to please other people rather than actually accomplish things. These ideological structures in fact try to push people away from the disagreeable real world, instead trusting their ideological documents above reality as people see it. This is a way to push away the anxiety of knowing the world they've created is fake. The historian Amaury de Riencourt also talks about how the society's knowledge gets categorized into a list of okay subjects to study and have opinions on, so society is not intellectually challenged. In Confucian China, this was with forcing the entire elite to study Confucian and ancient Chinese texts that had no relation to their lives. In India, it was domination by a priest class, and in Islam, it was Al-Ghazali, who came to the conclusion that study of the Quran is more important than seeing the outside world, since God determined the outside world at his whim. In Greece and Rome, it was a study of the Platonic forms and Epicureanism. In every case, the only way to judge real-world problems was to read ancient texts, with no space for coming up with new ideas.
I see this with modern echo chambers, people refusing to speak with anyone outside their bubbles, and pure irrationality. This is especially strong with leftists, many of whom think that to speak with anyone means that you agree with them and just scream at you and block you if you challenge them. For example, Sargon of Akkad has been given an assortment of labels such as Nazi, alt-right sympathizer, and many more for simply debating Richard Spencer. Just example, no intention of promoting Sargon or his views. The powers that be will support decadence so that the people are too distracted fighting each other instead of fighting the powers that be. Ever noticed how the social justice movement has taken off in 2014? I know that libertarianism was gaining popularity from 2008 to 2012. I remember in 2012 and 2013, the alternate media was on a strong upswing. The Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street movements were getting close to figuring out that the cooperation between big government and big corporations was the source for so many of our problems. Then 2014 came, and the social justice movement rose. I'd attribute it to largely a handful of big corporations trying to get people obsessively look for microaggressions rather than focus on corporate corruption and influence in government. The same companies that talk about racism, sexism, and prejudice towards queers in the Anglophone world don't do the same in, say, China or Saudi Arabia. Likewise, say, Raytheon would rather have the left talk about trans issues rather than the fact that Raytheon's military hardware is used by the U.S. government in unjustifiable wars, and that Raytheon sells military hardware to imperialist, human rights abusing states such as Israel and Saudi Arabia. You can see this talked about in the videos, The Blunt Truth About the Trayvon Martin Case by Storm Clouds Gathering, and Dave Smith Explains the Origin of Woke Culture. Do you think the powers that be would rather have us argue over A, how many genders there are, or B, whether or not vaccine manufacturers should be held liable for injuries that their products cause? The media just avoids talking about issues such as foreign policy or corporacy. I remember in the debates for the 2020 United States presidential election that foreign policy wasn't even talked about at all. Anti-war candidates such as Ron Paul and Tulsi Gabbard are ignored, and if they aren't ignored, smeared. The media will talk about dividing issues like abortion, how many genders there are, or other cultural war issues rather than unifying issues such as corruption. Likewise, the media will put attention on polarizing candidates or candidates of polarizing personalities such as Donald Trump rather than way less polarizing personalities such as Ron Paul or Tulsi Gabbard. And this is even before all the distraction and controlled opposition and media. Part 2. Can China and Russia overpower the West? A huge card that could end up helping the Chinese is the crisis of leadership that's currently happening in the West. The Western nations are now in a basically religious civil war between the right and left, which consumes most of the population's excess energies. Most of the Western elite hates itself so much that it's incapable of acting effectively. If the West doesn't sort out its social issues within the next 10 years, China wins. Incoherent elites have allowed nations which are materially much weaker to make huge gains. The Manchus were able to conquer China with 1/100th of China's population in the 17th century. Such Chinese society was so fractious at the time. A similar thing can be said of the British conquest in India, or the Spanish conquest of Aztec or Inca empires, or the Roman conquest of Greece. To paraphrase is what was said in A Historian Explains Generation Z. In history, despotism is often buttressed by social isolation and fragmentation. Freedom is maintained by strong individuals, communities, and values that keep despotisms at bay. Look at the absolutely unbelievable corruption in America, where people often do not trust their own neighbors, with similar conditions in southern Italy. In the entire continents of Africa and Asia, tyrannies were driven by societies where people lived inside clans and or tribes and rarely associated outside of social networks. If we want our freedom to survive, we need to be able to stem this. According to 2021 survey data compiled from YouGov, Nationscape, and the Voter Study Group, 36% of Republican and 33% of Democrat respondents say that they feel justified to use violence to achieve political goals. This represents a sharp increase from 2017, in which only 8% of Republican and 8% of Democrat respondents said the same. Similarly, a survey performed by the University of Virginia Center for Politics found that more than 80% of both Democrats and Republicans believe that the opposing party poses a clear and present danger to American democracy. Overall, more than 80% of survey respondents said that they are afraid that they or someone close to them will experience personal loss or suffering due to the effects of the opposing party's policies. American decline. political polarization, Wikipedia. If you have any doubts that the West is in a religious civil war, you can see a sample of the evidence by looking through the comments section of Why I Left and Why I'm Back. Liberals are fleeing red states now as conservatives begin to bully them. This is why they want to replace you. And for good measure, Democrat plans to attempt to smear Virginia Republican gubernatorial candidate Glenn Youngkin. Controversial, I'd rather be Russian than Democrat t-shirt from Trump rally gets beautiful explanation. Congresswoman and openly advocates hates end to American democracy. But wait, there's more. The mainstream left has given up on free speech and openly supports censorship. First it was censorship of hate speech, then censorship of misinformation. Increasingly, the modern left believes is that anyone who is not with them is their enemy. These come from popular media outlets. Through the comment sections of Why I Left and Why I'm Back, liberals are fleeing red states now as conservatives begin to bully them. This is why they want to replace you. From the right and from the left, why hearing both sides is dangerous, how moderates serve the right, and why neither left nor right just means right wing, Bonapartism. Right. The video why I left and why I'm back. You have to dig deeper to see what I am talking about, but for the others, you really don't. Okay, so those are some right-wing comment sections. Now let's go check out some left-wing comment sections. Oh, and by the way, check out this thumbnail. Take that as you will. You can also see titles like so-called centrists are really incredibly dangerous extremists. Democrat plans hence attempt to smear Virginia Republican and gubernatorial candidate Glenn Youngkin. Controversial I'd rather be Russian than Democrat t-shirt from Trump rally gets beautiful explanation. And Congresswoman and openly advocates hates end to American democracy. Let's see. Let's check out this comment section. I'm not gonna read them out loud, but you can read. Now, I don't think that makes you feel very good. feeling that now, in the 2020s, people's heads practically explode whenever they're faced with political views that are different from their own. Even the non-political YouTuber, Mr. Who's the Boss, has noticed this. I'm worried about humanity's future. This reminds me of 1984's 2 Minutes Hate, in which members of the party express hatred for designated enemies of the party. Society where there's more talk in the media about some incident in a local school district, like Loudoun County, than the fact that our government has created a brutal war in Syria and is complicit in Saudi Arabia's genocidal war in Yemen.
What's happened in each of these decadent societies is that ideological structures develop to please other people rather than actually accomplish things. These ideological structures in fact try to push people away from the disagreeable real world, instead trusting their ideological documents above reality as people see it. This is a way to push away the anxiety of knowing the world they've created as fate. With average people so cut off from the mega decisions that would determine their lives, they start to become passive, fatalistic, and lose hope. Populations here stop being proud of their societies and have to be whipped into battle, basically. When people wonder why South Italians don't trust their government at all, or so much of the money the US put towards Iraq was spent corruptly, it's that these were the heartlands of decadent empires that screwed their populations over so much that no one trusts anyone else. This happened to differing degrees around the world depending on how parasitic the regimes involved were.
The best example of decadence, and decadence ex machina. The best example of decadence. The media. With the mainstream media, combined with the censorship of the alternate media by big tech. The only way you can rise is by pleasing the powers that be. In today's world, pleasing large social hierarchies is that are really the way to get ahead. Are really the way to get ahead and succeed in society. David Weissman and the Lonely Crowd like to say that in the 19th century, he became successful through building a factory or setting up a silver mine in the West. Well, in the 20th, it was through rising up in a corporate hierarchy. Most of the people I know who went to top universities aren't people that are actually that innovative or brave or people you want to lead. They're mostly just people pleasers who checked off all the boxes. WhatIfAltHist's, the 7 emotions that push civilization, and Decadence ex machina. Mainstream support of Hillary Clinton, and even when she supported nuclear war. The powers that be are so detached from reality that they will support Hillary Clinton because her warmongering would support the military-industrial complex, along with Israel and Saudi Arabia, even though we all would suffer, even though they would suffer in a nuclear war.
Of the same sort of customs we saw in earlier decadent societies. Decadent societies often do have a degree of self-loathing, and it might be subconscious sometimes, and it might be fully conscious. And the modern West's self-loathing is the furthest out example of this in history. And this comes from people realizing the decadent society and the cultural worldview it establishes isn't the real one. So people start to loathe that and try to tear away at the society's foundations so that they can get more in touch with reality. But the truth is that such attempts normally do more harm than good because they don't see what societies fundamentally need to survive and what aspects of that society are necessary. It becomes a deep emotional loathing rather than a realistic attempt to reform the society in a way that actually works. Let's jump to another example. The Roman Empire's falling and the Germanic barbarians are outside a city in southern France. The defenders don't provide any defenses and are in fact working with the barbarians against their local rivals only to have their city sacked. It was incomprehensible that the barbarians could be a real threat after Rome had been strong for so long. It had been centuries since non-Roman threats had been in the area.
I see this in the anti-war movement is that people seek whatever is self-aggrandizing rather than the objective truth. To this very day, the left thinks that the Iraq War was a war for oil, or instead of a war to take out an enemy of Israel and Saudi Arabia, that Israel is an American puppet instead of vice versa, and Marxists simply blame capitalism, which is literally just any economic system that they dislike. Social justice makes it taboo to hold minorities, whether it be Muslim Arabs, who the Saudis are, or especially, and I mean especially, Jews to standards or accountability, or acknowledge that minorities, anyone other than and white Christian men, can do anything wrong, with, for example, Israel's imperialism and human rights abuses being somehow how America or white people's fault. This reminds me of how India and China in the 11th century reacted to barbarian invasions. In India, the Rajas, kingdoms, built temples to please the gods, as to victory, instead of taking on the tactics that made the Muslim conquerors so powerful or otherwise improving their militaries, allowing the Muslims, who they outnumbered 100 to 1, to conquer and rape northern India. In China, when the Song dynasty was facing a barbarian invasion to their north from the Liao peoples, instead of funding or reforming the army to improve it, the Chinese composed poetry about how badly they wanted to reconquer the north. In China, there was a saying, just as good iron is not beaten into nails, a good man does not become a soldier. In other words, being an enlisted soldier was looked down upon as a job for losers. If I present information to someone, especially a leftist, showing that American imperialism is actually Israeli imperialism, if I'm somewhat lucky, a leftist would cop out and call me a conspiracy theorist without refuting my point. If I'm unlucky, they'll block me and report me to get me kicked off of social media, considering how many social media companies are located in Silicon Valley, where leftism and social justice absolutely domineer. Applying social justice to foreign policy, in my opinion, is a belief in bizarre fads.
This happened at differing degrees around the world depending on how parasitic the regimes involved were. What we see with decadence is a complete lack of interest in other societies. In India before the Muslim conquest, the Indians thought that they could learn from no other societies, and even that speaking to non-Hindus would permanently pollute a person. Muslim visitors described Indians as the most arrogant people they had ever met. When a British delegation arrived in China in the 18th century with rifles, steam engines, and clocks, technology literally centuries ahead of anything in China, the Chinese replied the British had nothing of value to them. The Romans and Greeks literally built their idea of civilization not off any objective measures of development, but rather whether other cultures spoke the same language as them. Something that may shock people is that I think the modern West is headed in the same direction.
Of both Tankies on the left, along with Eurasianists/Duginists on the right, in which political radicals are supporting foreign states against their own domestic opponents. Left-wingers think their opponents are Nazis who oppose civil rights and want to borderline enslave everyone who isn't cisgender, heterosexual, white and Christian, and are backed by anti-democracy billionaires and corporations, while right-wingers think that their opponents are child-grooming Maoists who want to give sex change surgery and hormones to toddlers. Can you imagine why this is problematic for social cohesion? Do you see how this can be a problem? Differences between the left and the right and the West, or at the very least in the Anglophone world, goes beyond politics. It permeates into their very lifestyles, and I'd say that the left and right may nominally be in the same Western civilization, but are effectively very different societies. Kind of like how China and Japan are nominally part of the same East Asian civilization, but are effectively two societies of two completely different personalities. Left-wing way of life. Food. Vegetarian, tofu, health foods, exotic foreign goods, acai, low fat. Clothes. Casual, streetwear, bright colors, revealing, unexpected. Worship. Religious experience comes to furthering progressive causes for oppressed groups in the public sphere. Sex/love. Kiki, non-heteronormative, equal between men and women. Consent is very important. Art, exists to challenge social assumptions, purposefully offensive to challenge worldviews. Teachers exist to empower their students. They will teach them how to change the world in a positive way and engineer them to be better people. I'd say that parenting is also similar. The right-wing way of life. Food. Traditional Western, meat and potatoes, high fat. Clothes. Formal, traditional, modest, dark colors. Worship. Comes from traditional religion. Sex/love. Vanilla, heteronormative, follows traditional male-female gender roles. Art. Exists to fulfill traditional expectations of beauty. Teaching exists to prepare students to be stable members of society, knowing about their society's ethics and useful skills. Well, parenting is likewise similar. Left-wing language. Soft and rosy to avoid hurting the feelings of women and minorities. Racism. Power plus prejudice. Freedom. Convenience. Lack of personal responsibility and or lack of boundaries. Capitalism. Any economic system a left-winger doesn't like. Oppression. Inequality between groups of people, not being able to get or do what you want when you want it. Right-wing language. To the point, direct and blunt. Racism. Belief that one race is superior or inferior to another. Freedom. Self-actualization. Freedom from coercion. Or for libertarians, freedom from coercion. Capitalism. Voluntary exchange of goods and services. Oppression. Coercion from the state. Now, on to China and Japan stereotypes.
When I was in America, I never hated Chinese people. After coming to Japan and having a lot more interactions with them, I still don't, but I totally understand why many Japanese do. They are complete opposites of each other. Of course, each person is different and should be judged on a case-by-case basis, but these are the general, and I want to stress general, differences between most Chinese and most Japanese people. First, China. Chinese people tend to talk super loud. They are direct. Their general cleanliness and hygiene is way lower than that of Japan. They're rude, not by US standards, but very rude compared to Japan. Generally dishonest, selfish, not punctual. They're friendly, overweight compared to Japan, open, positive. They can deal with even the most shit conditions. They're lazy, not by European standards, but by Japanese. They're not shy, a bit disorganized, kind of dumb, and tight with money. Now for Japan. Japanese people are overly obedient, quiet, indirect, clean, polite, punctual, thin, judgmental, two-faced, by the book for everything, which can be ridiculous because I'm talking about robot-level obedience to the code with zero free thought. Hardworking, negative, dark, humble, super shy, organized, and generous. They really have nothing in common. They really have nothing in common besides eating a lot of rice and noodles, generally. But what have your experiences been? Would you like to know their stereotypes for Americans or for British or Europeans? Let me know because I can do a video about that. I think you might find that interesting.
You can really see with the left and right having both different lifestyles and using different definitions why they absolutely cannot stand each other. I'd attribute some political polarization to a combination of economic and social factors. The collapse of the middle class, with millennials and zoomers not successfully building up wealth and struggling to even pay rent, with many of them being buried alive in student loan debt in America. With unemployment and pessimism about the economy and insolvent welfare states in Europe, has led to the explosion of political radicalism among the young. When it comes to the media, the way the media gets people's attention is to show members of the opposite sex you'll never be able to sleep with, events that horrify you, and political concepts that alienate you, putting you into a permanent state of fear and psychological arousal, combined with the internet echo chambers and North American youth being lonely, in part from not being allowed to go outside unsupervised. When it comes to infiltration, I'd say that China's attempts to infiltrate the West are obvious and overall pretty cheesy. With Russia is the exact opposite. Russia has not only done a good job at influencing and infiltrating the alternate media, worse is that no one knows about it and are so few good sources on Russia. The mainstream media is completely hysterical and has no idea what it's dealing with, as explained in the video, What is Duganism and Why It Matters by Freedom Alternative. Basically, Duganism, Eurasianism, is a strategy in totalitarian philosophy for advancing a dream of a Russia-centric Eurasian world, a Soviet Union 2.0, if you will. Another good comparison would be Orwell's 1984's Eurasia. In Orwell's world, the state's totalitarian ideology is neo-Bolshevism. Rather, while in Dugin's world, it's national Bolshevism. Part of this is by making other countries, like Finland, which are nominally independent, pretty much subservient to the Russian state. The left and right has done virtually nothing to combat Duganism because they don't know what it is, and partially because they're too hysterical and incapable of knowing what they're against. Dugin also speaks in a confusing manner on purpose. Part 3. Will Europe stand up for itself? I'm worried about Europe and whether or not Europeans will stand up for themselves. The video, The 6 Most Extreme Societies Ever, Wheel 1, from 13 minutes to 16 minutes 23 seconds, talks about how the modern West values harm, or the belief that harming others is the worst thing possible over any other value. I'm worried that Western, by extension Northern Europe, since Denmark, Norway, and Sweden share the same progressive values about harm and comfort as Western Europe, won't put up a fight against Dugin's Eurasia, considering how the lives of Western Europeans have become so comfortable and easy. Don't believe me? Go to YouTube Comment Finder, put in a URL from the following videos and search Europe. Gun gripes number 103, the sheep mentality. UK to ban kitchen knives, sacrificing freedom for security, elderly NYC store clerk arrested for defending himself against abusive criminal, FK NYC, self-defense laws, minimal force to protect criminals. Also in Germany, in 2012, there were attempts to ban circumcision, which were unsuccessful. This doesn't give me confidence that the Europeans have the willpower to stand up for values and principles. Look at those comments. Think about them for a minute. Are you confident that those people are psychologically ready to give up their cushy lives of comfort to confront Russian troops carrying assault rifles, decked out in body armor and camouflage, supported by tanks, armed helicopters, and jets? I'm not prescribing positions that you should have on weapon laws, hate speech laws, social justice, circumcision, the welfare state, or immigration. But I do intend to show my concerns for Western Europe's mental health, which affects whether or not they are willing to give up comfort to stand up for values and principles, to stand up for their own freedom. This isn't the first time that Europeans have fallen to barbarian invasions. Julius Caesar has written about how the Gauls in modern-day France went soft due to urbanization and contact of Roman luxuries, and were losing out to more savage Germans, which had neither. Approximately 2,000 years, 20 centuries later, the successors to the Gauls, the French, surrendered to the descendants of the Germanic barbarians, and National Socialist Germany, one of the most evil regimes in the world at the time, despite the fact that France had a chance of beating down Germany. As talked about in the videos, the forgotten 1939 invasion of Germany, and what if France never surrendered in World War II? Eastern Europe has more of a will to fight back, but less the means to fight back due to their smaller populations, along with their poorer economies. Well, Europe is the exact opposite. Modern day Northern and Western Europe's taboos around violence, even in self-defense, reminds me of the Adventure Time episode Crystals Have Power, in which Jake injures his best friend Finn in a tough guy contest, and after which Jake has a non-violence vow. The Crystal Guardians come and take Finn, put him into a crystal bubble, and zap, happen to turn him into a crystal. Jake fails to overcome the Crystal Guardians in time, even though he could easily overpower them and rescue Finn solely because of Jake's pacifism. And this must be weird coming from an anti-war blog/forum. I'm a non-aggressionist, not a pacifist. The difference is that a pacifist is against all violence, or at least war, while a non-aggressionist opposes violence in all cases except for defense. Part 4. How to fight decadence. I think that there's 3 things we should all do to fight decadence. 1. Have humility/be humble. You do not and cannot know everything. Be open to being wrong and changing your views and policies if you're wrong. 2. Look for information and views that differ from your own. 3. Falsify your own positions. This is how Ryan Dawson is so good at making arguments and avoids nonsense. I remember a video in which he stated that he has debates in his head until his points can't be refuted. Create a steel man argument, and the inverse of a straw man argument. A steel man argument, and aka a strong man argument, and is when you argue against the best and strongest version of your opponent, hence argument or ideas. I have paranoid fantasies. 5. Why I'm not a complete pessimist. Admittedly, I have some paranoid fantasies about the world becoming like Orwell's 1984. On the Western Front, the Russian army invades Eastern Europe. The Eastern Europeans fight like absolute demons, preferring death to having their men and boys becoming slaves, and their women and girls being raped. The Russian army, slams into the industrialized, wealthy Western Europe. Despite Western Europe having the ability to raise high-quality militaries and outnumbering the Russians, the Western Europeans, being such comfortable and decadent pacifist wannabe hippies, chicken out of fighting. If the Russians were wild bears, the Western Europeans are mollycoddled house cats and poodles. The Russian army mindlessly pillages and rapes Europe, much like it did as the Soviet army during World War II, as talked about in the documentary Hellstorm, or alternately, the Imperial Japanese Army's rape of Nanking on a continental scale. During this time, I'm a conscripted private first class in the U.S. Army, or a private first class, or if I survive long enough, a lance corporal in the Marines, though I figured the Marines would be busy in the Pacific. I was a JROTC cadet, so I have a higher rank. Assisting my second lieutenant, who was once my commanding officer, her in JROTC, with an M240 machine gun, and freezing our butts off on the Eastern European plain while trying to fend off a barbarian invasion, were then featured in propaganda like privates and junior lieutenants in the 1984 film adaptation of 1984. But in all seriousness, I'm not a complete pessimist. Here are some videos from Purin. Russian mobilization. What does it mean for the war in Ukraine? Sending their best. Debunking the myth of Russian cannon fodder in Ukraine. How lies destroy armies. Lies, cover-ups, and Russian failures in Ukraine. If Russia is struggling in Ukraine, it won't be any easier if Russia fights any other European country with a substantial population. The Polish armed forces is more experienced and better funded than their Ukrainian counterparts, and Polish society is a much higher trust society than Ukraine's, with far less corruption and far better social cohesion. The United Kingdom and France are nuclear powers. Germany has a larger economy than Russia by both total purchasing power parity and per capita purchasing power parity. I think that Germany is a screwdriver's turn away from building a kick-ass army in a similar way that Japan is a screwdriver's turn away from being able to build nuclear weapons. Remember that 80 years ago, from the time that this article was published, Germany had the best army on the face of the planet. The main thing holding Germany back is their psychology, as a reaction to the world wars and the Holocaust, which made the Germans obsessed with not doing harm. Then again, Purin seems to me to be a merely less biased source, and I do not consider him to be true alternate media. He could either be a propagandist himself, or more likely, he duped by propaganda. Okay, here's a bonus. It's Super States of 1984. Excuse me. Of a 1984 style super states. East Asia, People's Republic of China and Democratic People's Republic of Korea, ruled by Emperor Xi Jinping of the Xi dynasty and his buddy Kim Jong-un of the Kim dynasty. State ideology is legalism. Xi Jinping thought in Juche. Eurasia, aka Grand Duchy of Moscow, aka Muscovite Empire, which is Russia, Belarus, Transnistria, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia, and maybe Kazakhstan and parts of eastern Ukraine, ruled by Tsar Putin the Terrible, philosopher Alexander Dugin, and domestic intelligence / secret police chief, FSB director, Alexander Portnikov. State ideology, National Bolshevism. FSB director Alexander Portnikov is perhaps the closest man to Lavrentiy Beria, the head of the dreaded NKVD during Stalin's era. When it comes to flags, the 1984 movie version of 1984 depicts Oceania as using Ingsuk's flag and logo, so I guess it's plausible for the National Bolsheviks / Eurasianists to do the same, with Eurasia using the National Bolshevik Party flag and logo. Oceania, State of Israel, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United States of America, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Republic of Korea, Republic of China / Taiwan, Japan, Commonwealth of Australia, and New Zealand. Notice this flag here. The flags of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the corporate American flag represent and how Israel, Saudi Arabia, and controls America, along with American corporacy. Well, the NATO, half the flag represents hence all of their allies. Thank you for listening. Remember, the lesser of two evils is still evil, and the enemy of my enemy is not my friend. Here's my social media link tree, which I ask that you keep archive. You keep the link and archive my content, and please, to make sure that YouTube, Google does not monetize this video.
Listen, you son of a bitch. What the fuck's your problem? You want to sit here and say that I'm a goddamn fucking Russian? You get in my face with that, I'll beat your goddamn ass, you son of a bitch. You piece of shit. You fucking goddamn fucker. Listen, fuckhead, you have fucking crossed a line. Get that through your goddamn fucking head. Stop pushing your shit. You're the people that have fucked this country over and gang raped the shit out of it and lost an election. So stop shooting your mouth off claiming I'm the enemy. You got that, you goddamn son of a bitch? Fill your hand. I'm sorry, but I'm done. You start calling me a foreign agent, those are fucking fighting words. Excuse me.
Because as Google does not believe in free speech, along with its ties to BlackRock and Oracle. Oracle collects Oracle data mines info on billions of people, and BlackRock is crushing small businesses. His to try to create a monopoly for itself. I don't want to give Google ad revenue.